All right, so this is my first time scoping, so I'm just trying to situate the camera properly so my head isn't as huge. Hey, Niyoshi. So it's my first scope, right? And I'm excited to get on. But I didn't want to just like come on and chat and say, hey, I really wanted to talk about something that, hey, Shannon, thank you. That is, hey, Tamika. That is important and pretty substantial. So I live in New York City, and here in New York, there's a case in the media that's garnering a lot of attention. And it was apparently dismissed just recently. So the short story is that there were 5 young boys, young black boys from Brooklyn, accused of raping a 18-year-old girl in a park. The girl's father was with her in the park, and he alerted authorities that the boys had taken advantage of him and raped his daughter. So when the story first came out, of course, people were appalled and the city was on high alert. But there were just bits and pieces that didn't make sense. So yesterday, I believe it was either yesterday or today, the DA decided to dismiss all charges against the young boys because what they've discovered is that the 18-year-old young lady, in fact, gave the boys permission to have intercourse with her. So the sex was consensual with the boys, apparently because the boys came upon her in the park having sex with her father. So the young lady, who's 18, was in a public park engaging in sexual behavior and sexual activity with her father when the boys came upon her. And somehow or another, the boys were invited to have sexual intercourse with this young lady also. So thankfully, the boys have been exonerated because the young lady and her dad decided to tell the truth. That's great because we don't want to see any young black men sent through the prison industrial pipeline if it's not necessary. But more important than that, it got me to thinking about the young lady and the mental state that she must have been in to, one, be in a public park having sex with anyone, 2, be having sex with a family member, her father, and to then invite 4 strangers or accept 4 strangers to join in and have sex with her as well. And I think it's important to realize that she is a victim in this situation almost threefold because of the position she's in. Right, Shannon? It's horrifying almost, but these are the things we need to talk about. And it got me to thinking about a lot of the things that I talk to women that I work with, women in my life, and women that I'm in contact with. And that is that what we experience in our childhood becomes our patterns and our habits in our adult relationships. And so when it comes to abuse, especially with children, what we learn from that abuse becomes who we are as adults and how we behave in those relationships as adults, right? So with sexual abuse in particular, it teaches us 2 really important lessons. And those lessons aren't positive, but they're important because it's what sexual abuse children carry with them into adulthood. And that's number 1, that it places you in this position of victimhood. And so you then continue to place yourself in a position to be victimized in your ongoing relationships with friends, with family members, with lovers, with business associates, with your boss, with whomever you come into contact with. Because when you're very young, you're very susceptible to suggestion. And if someone takes advantage of you at a young age and does it continually, you learn from that behavior that your role is as the victim. Number 2, it also teaches you that your position in life is for the consumption of others. So you're here to serve others, either their sexual desires or what have you. And so that's dangerous because then we internalize that idea that we are, number one, a victim, and number two, our job is to satisfy other people. So it forces us to almost ignore our own needs, our own wants, our own desires, and suppress whatever it is that we're feeling and go on and carry ourselves in this manner when it comes to our adult relationships. And then what happens, of course, is that we find ourselves in relationships with predators, with those who are going to abuse us also, because they're feeding off of our need to be a victim because it's what we know. And so then we find ourselves in relationships with physical abusers, emotional abusers, habitual liars, cheaters, and all of that. And unfortunately, it becomes a pattern, and it can cause mental illness and disease and all types of stresses for us. And so I myself am a sexual abuse survivor, because I hate the word victim. Exactly, Shannon. Or we don't trust love. We don't trust love, and we don't believe that we're worthy of love from others. And so when people come to us genuinely to love us and care for us, we don't accept that because it's unfamiliar. So we seek out the people who are going to abuse us because being in that position of victimhood feels, I don't want to say it feels good, but it feels good in the sense that we know it and we understand how to behave in that position, right? So when it comes to growing up and now forming your own sexual identity, generally, one of two things can happen. You have the polar opposites and the extremes of the situation, which is that one, we become hypersexual and are promiscuous and don't value our sexuality and just give it to anyone and everyone. Or we can become asexual because sex was used as a tool to hurt us, to harm us, to cause us pain. And so we don't know how to separate that pain from our sexual energy, from our sexual behavior. And we can just kind of tune out and tap out and not intimately connect with anyone because of the fear and the hurt and the shame and the guilt that's attached to our sexuality. So I think it's important that we talk about these things because it's the only way that we're going to start to get any reconciliation from them. And I don't want to harp on the negative because so many of us are dealing with it, and it's great to talk about it. It's great to deal with it, but we need to address it from a position of resolution and not just drudging back up the negative emotions that are surrounding it. So I wanted to just offer up a few tips for people who may find themselves in the position of victim, even in their adult life when they have a choice. Right? So let me get my little notes here because I know I have some. So for me, again, I'm also a sexual abuse survivor. And what that means to me is just that I experienced trauma at the hands of an adult when I was a child. I've learned to separate that trauma from the person I am now in a healthy way where I understand that it happened. I understand that I've gained a certain level of insight from it as well, but I don't carry the baggage of it with me anymore. And I did that through a few steps. It's actually 5 steps. And so, of course, the first thing that we have to do is to acknowledge what happened to us, right? Because it did happen. And pretending that it didn't happen is harmful to our psyche, harmful to our spirit, harmful to our emotional and overall well-being. So you have to say to yourself, this thing happened to me. I experienced this occurrence in my life at the hands of, and it made me feel that way at the time. And now I still feel these feelings, whatever those feelings may be. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things to do because you have to admit to yourself that you were used, that you were taken advantage of, especially when it comes from an older person that you trusted. You then have to come to terms with the fact that the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones who harmed you. And now what does that mean for you, and how does that affect your perspective of life and the world and others? So it's difficult to acknowledge it because it's going to bring up all types of other issues, but we have to. And then secondly, you have to forgive yourself. So you have to know that it was absolutely not your fault, that you absolutely did not deserve to feel that pain, to go through that experience, and that you didn't put yourself there. It occurred, and like everything in life can be used to motivate us, to push us forward. There's always a purpose for it, and we can use it for our higher selves and for our greater good and to help society, etc. So you want to take away the blame, the self-blame, and not further put yourself in a position of victimhood by blaming yourself. And then, of course, you want to begin to purge yourself of the negative emotions and those feelings that are lingering. If you feel ashamed, if you feel guilty, if you feel sad, if you feel depressed, if you sometimes flash back, often you have people who can become so depressed that they're suicidal because the pain can just be that intense sometimes. And so, of course, you need to get those feelings out, get those negative emotions out. So if that means talking about it, then you talk about it. If that means writing about it, you write about it, you sing about it, you do whatever feels good to you and allows you to purge, but you have to get it out. You have to tell your truth. And if you're telling your truth to people who are attempting to silence you, then you need to separate yourself from those people. Because those people may have been complicit in the acts that were happening while you were a child, and perhaps they don't want to acknowledge it, or it just may be a difficult topic for them to address. No one else is obligated to acknowledge your pain, but you're not obligated to stay in connection with people who don't acknowledge your pain either. Right? And so then, of course, we want to separate ourselves from the person who abused us. And that might be a really challenging thing to do because quite often, the people who abuse us are the people that we are related to by blood or bound to by some sort of contractual agreement or some lifelong bond, like this young lady in the park who was being molested, abused by her own father. So as a child, you may not have as much choice and you may be forced to be around that person. But as an adult, you can absolutely choose not to be in the same room, in the same space, in the same home, on the same block, or even in the same state with that person if it's not conducive to good mental health for you. Of course, if you have gotten to a place where you can acknowledge it with that person and the two of you can talk about the incidents, then that's a healthy thing to do, because some people are willing to admit their wrongs and take responsibility for their actions. But if you have been hurt and abused sexually, physically by an adult when you were a child who refuses to acknowledge what happened to you, it only is going to further make you feel like the victim. It's going to make you blame yourself, question yourself, and wonder why. And so the best thing for you to do is to separate yourself from that person. And specifically, when it comes to your new relationships, the thing that you have to do is to pay attention to the similarities between the people who come into your life and the person who victimized you. So if you meet characters who have certain things about them, certain quirks that remind you about them, of the abuser, or their behaviors are abusive, and in the beginning, we're not necessarily sure, but if they attempt to control you, if they attempt to dehumanize you, if they attempt to degrade you in any way, then you definitely want to stay away from those people. And what I find in working with women is that more of us have these issues than the rest of us know. So we're all carrying these burdens and not talking to each other and not sharing it because it's painful. And we're just trying to make it through life. But we have to discuss these issues and we have to talk about it and we have to get it out. And we have to begin to put ourselves in the survivor position so that we aren't any longer attracting the energy of people who want to take advantage of us and want to abuse us and mean us no good. And that's basically just what it is, because so many of us are dealing with the lingering issues from what occurred to us in childhood. And I think it's important that we discuss these things because it can lead us to larger open dialogue. And then, of course, it leads us to resolution of these issues. And that's always the point. So I just wanted to touch on that tonight. I know it's kind of deep for like my first scope, but that's what I'm about. Like, no beating around the bush. Let's get to it. Let's talk about the issues, the problems, and let's attempt to solve them through community, through open, honest dialogue, through transparency, because that's all I'm about, right? Hey, so we have a few new people. I don't know if I introduced myself, but I'm Phyla Antwine, and I'm a life and relationship coach for women specifically. I inspire women to live with purpose, love with passion, and lead with power. And the only way that we're able to do those things is to be honest with ourselves, accept our truths, and share them in a way that's healthy and helpful for others. Because when it comes to relationships, they're either doing two things. The people you're in the relationship with are either helping you to heal your pain, or they're furthering the hurt of that pain. Absolutely, Tamika. Thank you for being here. My absolute pleasure. Oh, have you? This is my first time actually scoping, so I'm glad you're here. I plan to scope more. I just have to make sure that I get the kids to bed early enough so that I'm not looking like I'm about to fall out. But, this is one of the things that I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about helping women to live a better life. I'm passionate about inspiring others through transparency and solution-based action. Because it's not about, like I said, drudging up the past and all of us sitting around complaining about our lives and what went wrong. It's about us sharing so that we know we're not the only one who experienced it, and there is brighter on the other side. So I just wanted to share that, and I will do some more scopes very, very soon. I'm going to go ahead and put myself to bed now. So thank you guys so much for watching. Maybe tomorrow I'll do another. Night. Thank you, honey. Love you. Mwah.